As we continue to move our way through the Gospel of Luke, we hear this story that comes in the midst of some of the same teachings that appear in Matthew in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Hear this reading. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And Jesus said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And the rich man thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to the man, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is for those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard, and the spaces in between, create room in our hearts for you. Amen. The cartoonist Charles Schulz, creator of the Peanuts comic strip, has been dead now for over 16 years. But for close to 5 decades, he had entertained and inspired folks around the world with the antics and musings of the everyman Charlie Brown, the blanket-toting Linus, his crabby sister Lucy, and of course the most beloved beagle of all time, Snoopy. Schulz died in his sleep at his home on Saturday, February 12, 2000. And the very next day, Sunday papers ran his last original comic strip. But though the final lines had been drawn, Schulz's cartoons, relabeled as Peanuts classics, live on in hundreds of daily and Sunday newspapers, including the local news press. Schulz was a deep thinker, and that would sometimes spill over into his comic strips. He was also well known as a somewhat anxious man, insecure despite the amazing popularity of his comic strip. He knew that about himself and wasn't above joking about it. He once said that he put everything that he was into Peanuts, and that the characters reflected his thoughts, his feelings, and his concerns. Perhaps that was best expressed and most often expressed through the voice of Charlie Brown. "I have a new philosophy," Charlie once said. "I am only going to dread one day at a time." The feelings of insecurity that Schultz experienced are also captured in his character Linus. Linus often proved to be very wise and able to understand some of life's complexities. But Linus did have one nagging obsession: his blanket. In one strip, Snoopy menacingly growls towards the blanket, preparing to snatch it away from its owner. Linus glowers at the beagle. "Touch it, dog, and you die." The blanket, after all, was Linus's security. Without it, he felt helpless and unable to function. Indeed, in another episode, his blanket is taken from him to be washed, and poor Linus falls completely apart. When it's finally returned to him, it is like a grand reunion. Weaning a child away from his or her security blanket is no easy task. I know one parent who, every time the blanket was washed, would cut it in two. Eventually, the night came when the 1-inch by 1-inch square of blanket couldn't be found at bedtime, and despite the initial trauma and tantrum, the child discovered that she could indeed make it through the night without her precious blankie. Parents, of course, are rightly concerned about helping a child move beyond the need for blankets and pacifiers and teddy bears. For everyone knows that ultimately all they provide is a false sense of security. But most children, fortunately, do eventually outgrow them, and in the end, blankets and teddy bears and such are really relatively harmless. The real danger surfaces when we become adults. And as adults, in our search for security, we dream up big people's versions of blankets. If you want to test my theory, by the way, be very observant of yourself next time you misplace your cell phone or your wallet or your spouse. No, we big people have our security blankets too, as individuals and as a society. And the real danger comes when we too allow ourselves to be lulled into a false sense of security, which really is the focus of our story from Luke. Yes, it appears to be about materialism, and in one very real sense it is, but really at core, this story is all about seeking security in an insecure world. This story is all about seeking security in an insecure world. Jesus is asked at the beginning of the story to resolve a dispute between two brothers who can't decide how they are to split their inheritance. They're arguing over it, and they hope Jesus will settle the argument. But Jesus declines to be drawn into their conflict. And instead, he warns against placing one's trust in possessions. And then, as is his wont, he tells a story. A farmer, mind you, not a subsistence farmer, but a man of great means, has a really good year. The harvest is rich and full. beyond full, fuller than full. In fact, it's more than his barns can hold. His silos would burst at the seams if he tried to stuff it all in. So what's he do? Well, apparently giving some of it away to the poor doesn't even cross his mind. He doesn't even think about passing some of it along to his favorite grandchildren. He is, it seems, like a young woman named Edith, whose scholar William Barclay once mentioned. Edith, it was said, lived in a little world, bounded on the north, south, east, and west by Edith. So it is with the farmer. He lives in his own little world. The boundaries the same as the boundaries of his own person. And so he needs to keep this stuff all for himself. And the only way to do that is to tear down the old barns and build new ones, bigger ones, better ones, fancier ones equipped with all the latest in grain storage equipment. Then he thinks to himself, once he's done that, now I am truly secure. I can take it easy. I can pop open a beer, order up a pizza, and binge watch the latest episodes of The Walking Dead. Which, of course, is exactly what he is. The Walking Dead. You self-centered fool, says God. This very night you're going to die. Then what'll happen to all your stuff? I once read that there is no such thing as a trailer hitch on a hearse because you can't haul a U-Haul. Yes, this story is about materialism, but more importantly, it is about the human attempt to feel self-sufficient. It is about the human quest for security. And in no uncertain terms, Jesus makes it clear security can't be found in stuff. Not real security. Not things, as he will later say, that can be stolen by thieves or destroyed by moths or worn out by use. No real security, genuine security, lasting security comes from stuff. Rather, it comes from being in relationship to God. When he's done telling the story with its climactic line about the time of death for the farmer, he looks right at the two squabbling brothers and he sums it all up. This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but isn't rich toward God. I love how Eugene Peterson translates it. That's what happens to you when you fill your barn with self and not with God. That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. Okay, preacher, I hear you. I haven't fallen asleep quite yet, but I want to know how this filling my barn with God stuff can be done. I mean, you can't run through a baling machine with God. You can't bag God up in burlap sacks. Does it mean falling on my knees and shouting, "Hallelujah, I've been saved"? Does it mean memorizing the Nicene Creed and becoming adept at theology and believing every single word? Does it mean quoting the Bible every time I turn around? What does it mean to fill my barn with God? Give me some help here. What does it mean to find security in the Holy One? Fair question. I don't have an answer for it. Jesus does. For throughout the gospel, he constantly reminds us that truly placing at the core of our existence love of neighbor, truly putting the needs of others ahead of our own, reaching out to the poor, the marginalized, the outcast, that, he says, again and again and again, is the best way to connect to God. Hear it again. Placing love of neighbor at the center of our lives, putting the needs of others ahead of our own, reaching out to the poor, the marginalized, the outcast, that is the best way to connect to God. In another of his parables, one found in Matthew, he reminds his listeners that even as you do it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, the hungry, the poor, the imprisoned, the homeless, even as you do it to these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it for me. You are connecting with the holy. When we forego storing up all that extra stuff in our silos and barns and learn to share it with those who have need, then we are truly placing the things of God at the center of our lives. And when we do that, we will find true and lasting security. Not just talking about the life to come. I'm talking about here and now. Over the last 2 weeks, as both political parties have held their quadrennial conventions, we've heard a lot about security, haven't we? Financial security, cyber security, security at our borders, security in our airports, security in our homes, security in our defenses. We've heard about controlling guns and tightening borders. We've been told about military alliances and trade agreements, all things designed to create a sense of security. And there is, I'm sure, a real need for us to have such conversations as a nation. And some of those things may prove necessary in this imperfect world of ours. I'm not naive. Neither was Jesus. But let's not pretend that any of them can provide us with lasting security. Do you feel any more secure knowing that we have thousands of nuclear warheads? I don't. It makes me feel more insecure. Such things can prove as futile and as foolish as stuffing barns with grain. Societally and individually, the only way we can find real security is in learning to love our neighbor. Love that's put into action. Not just in some abstract way, but in real, tangible ways. Our Muslim neighbor. Our Hispanic neighbor. Our transgendered neighbor. Our poor white neighbor. our rich white neighbor, our middle class white neighbor, our black neighbor. If we are looking for real security, maybe the question we really need to ask this year of ourselves, of our candidates for public office, all of them, what we really need to ask is, how can we, as a nation, and how can I, as an individual, best love my neighbor? I challenge you, put that question to any candidate for political office. It's not a religious question. You're not mixing religion and politics. Charles Schulz first introduced Linus's blanket in a strip published way back in 1954. I looked it up to find out when it happened. In the first frame, Lucy and Charlie Brown are looking across the room as Linus sits on the floor clutching his blanket. "Why does he hold it like that?" Charlie Brown asks Lucy. "I'm not sure," responds Lucy, "but I think it gives him a feeling of security." In the next frame, Charlie Brown crosses the room in order to see for himself. He takes Linus's blanket and sits with it, and then in the last frame, as he sits there on the floor holding Linus's blanket, he blushes. And he says, "It doesn't work. I feel like an idiot." "You fool," said God to the selfish farmer, "this very night your life will be required of you. Then what will happen to all your stuff?" Sisters and brothers, when your night, your day, when it comes, might you not be called a fool? Might you not feel like an idiot? Might you have learned that the true source of security is found when we learn how to love our neighbors? For that is how you and I can truly be in relationship with the Holy One, loving our neighbors. And that, after all, is the only source of true, lasting, real security.